I'm Charlotte Whitman, 29 years old, and up until the night of my mother's 60th birthday, I thought I understood the kind of family I came from. We were gathered in my parents' backyard in Scottsdale under a canopy of string lights. The candles had just been lit on the cake when my mom turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She asked plainly, "Charlotte, what did you do with the $500,000 your father and I gave you?" I felt the fork slip from my fingers halfway to my mouth. The words didn't register at first. 500,000. What money? My brother Ryan, who sat across from me, turned ghostly pale, his wine glass trembling against the tablecloth. And that was the moment everything began to fall apart. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button. If you've ever had to question what you thought was true about your own family, I was born in Kansas City, but I've lived in Chicago for the past 6 years working as a graphic designer at a mid-sized branding firm. It's a job I worked hard to get after putting myself through art school, with a mix of scholarships and side gigs. I've always been quiet about my goals, but I've had one dream that never left me: starting my own design studio, something clean and modern where I could work with local artists and small businesses. I told my parents about that dream during a visit home last Thanksgiving, and they surprised me by saying they'd help when the time was right. Not much detail, just a soft promise that they'd be there when I needed them. Growing up, Ryan and I were never especially close. He had a way of filling a room with charm and easy confidence while I was more reserved. My parents loved us both, but there was no question he was the golden child. Dad's old colleagues knew Ryan's name before mine, and even at Christmas, Mom tended to lean into his stories first. While I didn't resent it, I learned early to keep my expectations low and my ambitions to myself still. When Mom called to say she was throwing a big party for her 60th, I didn't hesitate. I booked my flight the same day, ordered her a custom necklace from a little studio near my place, and told work I'd be out that weekend. I hadn't seen my parents in months, and I was looking forward to the break. Then Ryan called. His voice was tight, like he was choosing every word carefully. He said Mom had caught something bad, probably the flu, and the whole party was off. She'd been in bed for 2 days, barely able to eat. He told me Dad was stressed and didn't want visitors, said it was better. I stayed put in Chicago, that they'd reschedule when she was back on her feet. I offered to come anyway, just to help out, but he cut me off, said it was contagious. Said Dad had everything handled. I hung up, feeling unsettled. Something about the way he rushed through it didn't sit right. Mom had never once canceled a celebration in her life. She'd hosted dinners with a broken wrist and showed up to weddings with a fever. Why wouldn't she call me herself? The next day, neither of my parents answered their phones. Both went straight to voicemail. I waited a few hours, then called my Aunt Nancy, who lives about 20 minutes from my parents. She sounded surprised when I mentioned the flu, said she'd seen Mom just the day before, and everything had seemed normal. They'd been finalizing the guest list together, talking about catering and champagne. There hadn't been any mention of sickness. I didn't say much, but my stomach was already turning. Something wasn't adding up, and I wasn't about to sit around guessing what it was. That same night, I opened my bank account and stared at a transfer that made my heart stop. $500,000 gone with no name attached. No warning, no explanation, just a vague reference number and a hole I couldn't explain. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table in the dark, wondering how 50-degree spring rain could feel colder than snow. The necklace box still sat on my entryway table, unopened next to my boarding pass. I knew then that party hadn't been canceled. I knew I was going to Phoenix, whether Ryan liked it or not, and I knew something was deeply wrong with the people I called family. I landed in Phoenix late Friday night, the plane wheels touching down just past 10. The sky outside was dark, and still the kind of desert night that held a strange kind of silence. My friend Melissa was already waiting at the curb. She waved as I came out of the terminal, her headlights flashing as she pulled up. The drive to Scottsdale was quiet for the first few minutes. I sat in the passenger seat, the box with my mother's necklace tucked safely in my lap. Melissa glanced over as we hit the freeway, her brow raised. "You're going to the party, right?" she asked, keeping her eyes on the road. "It's supposed to be huge, live music, champagne tower, the works." That was the moment I knew for sure. Ryan had lied. The party hadn't been canceled. My mother wasn't sick. She'd never even known I wasn't coming. By the time we turned onto my parents' street, the neighborhood was glowing with cars and porch lights. I could see the flicker of candles through the dining room windows and hear laughter spilling out from the backyard. Melissa dropped me at the curb, and I stepped out slowly, my fingers tightening around the necklace box. Their house looked exactly as I remembered: low adobe walls, blooming bougainvillea near the entryway, and warm golden light glowing through the windows. I stood there for a second, trying to catch my breath, then walked up the path and opened the front door. Inside, the party was already in full swing. The dining table was loaded with hors d'oeuvres, and the music coming from the backyard speakers was just loud enough to blur conversations. I spotted my mother near the center of the room, radiant in a navy blue dress, talking animatedly with a woman from her church group. My father stood nearby, smiling as he refilled someone's wine glass. There was no trace of illness, no sign of anything being canceled, only celebration. I scanned the room and saw Aunt Nancy by the dessert table. She noticed me immediately, her expression shifting from surprise to warmth as she walked over and hugged me. "Charlotte, I had a feeling you'd show up," she whispered. "Your mom's been asking about you all night." "I wouldn't miss it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I hadn't spotted Ryan yet. I moved through the guests, careful not to make a scene, and approached my mom. Her eyes lit up when she saw me. "You came," she said, pulling me in. "I didn't think well. Ryan said you had a project you couldn't get away from." I handed her the necklace box. "Happy birthday," I said. She opened it carefully, the silver pendant catching the light. Her initials were etched into it, delicate and clean. "Charlotte, it's beautiful," she said, her voice soft. She hugged me again, longer this time. My father stepped in next, pulling me into his arms. "Good to see you, kiddo," he said, his voice full of that quiet, dependable calm. But as I stepped back, I caught sight of Ryan across the room. He was standing near the window with a drink in his hand, laughing too loudly at something someone had said. His eyes scanned the room, then landed on me. I saw the recognition hit his face, and then a flicker of something else. Surprise, tension, fear. He didn't come over. I stayed close to Aunt Nancy for most of the night. She leaned in at one point, her voice low. "He's been off all evening," she said, nodding toward Ryan. "Barely spoke to your parents, sticking to the edges like he's waiting for something." When the cake was brought out, everyone gathered near the dining room. The candles were already lit, the room glowing with warmth and sugar and the sound of clinking glasses. Mom stood at the head of the table, smiling. Dad was beside her. Guests raised their glasses, and I stepped forward, ready to join the toast. That's when Mom turned to me, her voice carrying clearly over the crowd. "Charlotte," she said, her smile slipping just a little, "what did you end up doing with the $500,000 your father and I gave you?" The room stilled. My glass hovered midair. 500,000. I looked at her, my throat tightening. "What do you mean?" I asked, the words catching. From across the table I heard Ryan's voice, forced and high. "She's probably been busy, Mom," he said quickly. "You know how it is with work in Chicago." Dad's eyes shifted, narrowing. "Ryan," he said sharply, "I asked Charlotte." I stood there, unable to breathe, my thoughts racing. I remembered the bank transfer, the missing $500,000, the vague record with no name. I looked between my parents, then at Ryan, who was now gripping the back of a chair so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "I don't know anything about 500,000, I said quietly. "You gave me 800,000 last year for the studio, and I haven't touched a dime of it. But this is the first I've ever heard of more." The silence was thick. Mom blinked, startled. "We wired you 500,000, same as your brother. Separate from the studio money. It was for your future, no strings attached." She looked at me like she was waiting for a different answer. I shook my head slowly. No one told me. I never got it." Ryan tried to speak again, but the words came out jumbled. "Maybe it was a mistake," he said quickly, laughing once sharp and hollow. "You know how banks mix things up? Maybe it landed in the wrong place." That was when Aunt Nancy stepped forward. She held a thin folder in her hands and opened it without a word. "It wasn't a bank error," she said, laying the pages gently on the table. "I checked the logs this morning. After Charlotte mentioned the strange transfer," she looked directly at Ryan, "the money was moved into your personal account 4 weeks ago. Every withdrawal is tied to your name." His chair scraped backward as he stumbled to his feet. His face had gone slack, pale, and wet with sweat. "I thought it was mine," he muttered. "I thought we shared the account." But the room had gone cold. My parents stood frozen, disbelief setting into their faces. I stared at my brother, trying to match the man in front of me with the one I grew up with. And then I realized I couldn't. The party had stopped, the cake untouched, every guest now silent watching. And this was only the beginning. The dining room had gone still except for the quiet hum of the chandelier above us. My mother stood frozen, her hand resting on the table beside the unopened cake. My father didn't say a word. His eyes never left Ryan, who had dropped back into his chair, shoulders hunched, face blank. Aunt Nancy's folder still sat between us, the documents inside spelling out the truth in numbers and timestamps. I didn't move. My hands were resting at my sides, clenched without realizing it. It felt like the entire room was holding its breath. "Charlotte," my mother said finally, her voice quiet, "you really didn't know about the money?" "Not at all." I shook my head slowly. "I only found out something was missing because I checked my account 2 days ago. That's how I saw the transfer, $500,000. But there was no name, just a reference code. I thought it might have been fraud." Ryan didn't look up. He kept his hands folded tightly, his thumbs pressing together. My father took a step forward, then another. "We sent each of you a separate gift," he said. "Same amount. Same day. It wasn't tied to anything. Not the studio, not school loans. Just something for your future." I looked between them both. "I never received anything like that." Ryan's voice cracked. "It was a mistake. I thought it was for me. I didn't check the account name. I saw it sitting there and assumed." My father narrowed his eyes, assumed Ryan's hands twitched in his lap. "I thought maybe it was a joint fund, like something you'd set up for both of us to use when needed." "No," my father said flatly. "That's not what we did. We set up completely separate accounts. One for you. One for your sister. Different routing, different access." He paused and turned to my mother, then back to Ryan. "That money was never meant for you to touch." Ryan's expression didn't change. He looked exhausted, older than he had when the party started. "I didn't plan it like this," he mumbled. "It just got complicated." "What got complicated?" my mother asked, stepping around the table. There was a pause before Ryan answered. "I was behind on some things. I made a few investments that didn't turn out. I figured I'd borrow what I needed, then replace it once things bounced back." Aunt Nancy crossed her arms, still standing near the head of the table. "Except it wasn't your money, and you didn't ask." His shoulders dropped further. "I know." He didn't try to argue. He didn't offer more. Around us, the rest of the guests stayed still, unsure if they should leave or stay or pretend they hadn't heard. I could hear someone in the kitchen clearing their throat, footsteps shifting toward the hallway. No one said anything else out loud. My mother backed away from the table and reached for the wall near the kitchen door. She pressed her fingers there for a moment, steadying herself. Her voice was softer when she spoke again. "You lied to your sister. You kept her away on purpose." Ryan didn't deny it. "I panicked," he said. "I knew once you asked about it, everything would come out. I didn't want it to happen tonight. Not like this." "But you were fine with it happening," my father said sharply. "Just not in front of people." Ryan closed his eyes. He didn't say another word. My father didn't speak either. He pulled out a chair and sat down slowly, one hand resting on the table, the other rubbing his jaw. The silence stretched long and thin. Eventually, I stepped back and walked into the living room, leaving the dining table behind me. A few of the guests were already quietly slipping out the front door. I didn't stop them. Aunt Nancy followed me. "You all right?" she asked quietly. I nodded once, just trying to think. She looked at me for a long moment, then sat down on the arm of the couch beside me. "There's more in that folder," she said. "He started pulling money the same week he bought that car. It wasn't one withdrawal, it was dozens." I stared at the floor, my voice low. "He told me Mom was sick." "I know," she said. "That's what made me dig." I stayed there a few more minutes before I stood up and walked outside. The patio lights were still on, casting a soft glow across the back garden. I could hear my father's voice through the open window, calm and firm. I couldn't hear Ryan anymore. Inside the house, everything that hadn't already broken was beginning to fracture. I leaned against the railing, staring at the hedge line near the back fence. Somewhere behind me, the cake was still sitting on the table untouched. It wasn't just about the money. It was what it had been tied to, what it represented. A promise, a future, a piece of trust I hadn't even known was there until it was gone, and Ryan had spent it without blinking. By the time I stepped back inside, most of the guests had cleared out. A few stood in the entryway, murmuring polite goodbyes, avoiding eye contact. Someone had blown out the birthday candles. The dining room smelled faintly of smoke and frosted cake, but no one had taken a slice. Ryan was sitting at the far end of the table, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. My father stood behind him, silent arms crossed over his chest. My mother hovered near the sideboard, her shoulders rounded as she wiped at her cheek with a tissue. Aunt Nancy was flipping through her folder again, pages turning one by one beneath her fingers. "I went through the transfer logs this morning," she said, her voice even. Charlotte mentioned something felt off, and I had a hunch. It didn't take long to find where the money went. She laid out the printouts in neat rows. Each one was labeled with a date and amount, a routing path. Her hand hovered over a highlighted line. This one, $120,000, wired to a brokerage in California. The account name matches the condo title Ryan just registered in his name. No one spoke. She continued. "Here's another. A jewelry store in Old Town. 10 grand cash pickup. 2 different restaurant payments flagged as high-tier private dining. And this one, she tapped the page gently, a wire to a marina company in Newport Beach. Boat rental deposit, 48 hours, first-class flights, 2 passengers. Ryan didn't raise his head. He stayed hunched over, saying nothing. My mother's voice was soft. "You spent all of it," Aunt Nancy answered instead. "Close to it. There's just under 30,000 left. But the rest, it's gone." My father stepped forward, his tone sharp but controlled. "You took money that didn't belong to you. You lied about it. And when we gave you the chance to be honest, you doubled down." Ryan finally looked up. "I didn't know what else to do," he said. "It started as just a short-term pull. I was going to replace it with what my father asked. You've been flipping properties for 2 years. You told me yourself the market's soft. What income did you think was coming?" Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I thought something would turn." Aunt Nancy let out a slow breath and turned to me. "You were never on that account," she said, "not even as a secondary. He added himself 3 days before the first withdrawal, then removed your name from the notifications." My father looked at her. "He altered it." She nodded. "There's a paper trail. I already printed the revision forms." My mother leaned against the wall for support. "Why would you do that?" she whispered. Ryan stood slowly, his voice low. "Because I didn't want her to see the alerts. If she saw them, she'd ask questions." "So you erased her," my father said. Ryan glanced toward me. "I wasn't trying to ruin anything. I just needed time. Time for what I asked. To figure out how to tell me the money was gone." He didn't answer. The silence settled again. The weight of it seemed to hang on all of us. I felt my mother's eyes move to me, then shift quickly away. Aunt Nancy began stacking the papers again, her motions careful. I have copies of everything she said: bank logs, account edits, emails between Ryan and the financial advisor. I've sent them to both of you already. My father gave a slight nod. Thank you. Ryan turned toward my mother, his voice brittle. Mom, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't think anyone would get hurt. She didn't speak. He tried again. You know I've always tried to take care of things on my own. She looked at him then, finally. And you've always had more than enough help. Her voice was even, but the sadness underneath it cut through the room like a blade. Ryan took a step toward her, but she held up a hand. No, she said gently. Not right now. My father turned toward the hallway. I'm calling the police, he said, reaching for his phone. This isn't just a family mistake. This is theft. Ryan's mouth dropped open, but my father's tone didn't leave room for argument. You had a chance to come clean. You chose to hide. You don't get to decide what happens next. Aunt Nancy stayed beside me, one hand resting lightly on my arm. I could feel my chest rise and fall, but I didn't say anything. The noise of the house had faded completely. No music, no chatter, no celebration left. When the officers arrived, they stepped into the dining room with quiet professionalism. My father handed them the folder, calmly explaining what had happened. Ryan stood with his hands at his sides, answering each question without a fight. The officer with the notepad nodded. We'll need to bring him in for formal questioning. Ryan glanced at all of us, at my mother, at my father, at me, and then followed the officers through the front door without a word. The house felt different after that. The lights were still on, but everything seemed dimmer. My mother sat down in the chair closest to the kitchen and covered her mouth with both hands. My father stood at the window, arms crossed. Aunt Nancy stayed with me near the hallway, her voice low. You didn't deserve this, she said. I looked at the table. The cake was still sitting there, candles long since cold. The ride to the police station was quiet. I sat in the back seat of my father's car while Aunt Nancy rode up front, her folder of documents tucked neatly in her lap. The air inside felt heavier than it had back at the house, like the weight of what just happened was still sinking in. Outside, the lights of Scottsdale passed in a blur, street signs, palm trees, small businesses closing up for the night. We pulled into the station just after 9. My mother had stayed home. She hadn't said a word as we left, just gave a quiet nod from her chair at the kitchen table, eyes fixed on the floor. A young officer led us into a waiting area with vinyl chairs and a front desk that smelled faintly of coffee and dust. After a few minutes, another officer appeared and introduced himself as Sergeant Dean Carter. He looked to be in his early 50s, with a clean-shaven face and tired but kind eyes. He guided us into a small room with a table and 3 chairs, asked if we needed water, then sat down across from us. My father slid the folder across the table. This is everything he said. Bank records, internal emails, confirmation of the transfers. My son accessed an account he wasn't authorized to touch and took $500,000 meant for my daughter. Sergeant Carter opened the folder and began reading. His brow furrowed slightly as he scanned the first few pages. He asked a few quiet questions, confirming names, account ownership dates, and took notes in a small spiral notebook. He claims he thought the funds were his. My father added voice level, but he altered the account settings. He removed my daughter's notifications. He used the money for personal gain. The sergeant nodded. We've already spoken with Mr. Whitman, he said. He acknowledged making the transfers, says he believed it was a joint account, but the evidence here suggests otherwise. He looked at me. Miss Whitman, your name is not listed anywhere on the current account. All documentation indicates sole ownership by your father, with you as the designated recipient of the funds. I nodded. That's correct. I never had access to that money. I only found out something was wrong 2 days ago. Sergeant Carter turned a few more pages, then set his pen down. Based on the information provided, this meets the threshold for felony theft under Arizona statute, specifically second degree. Because the amount exceeds $250,000, it's categorized as a Class 2 felony. Aunt Nancy sat very still beside me. My father gave a slow nod. "Assuming you wish to proceed with formal charges," the sergeant continued, "we've already initiated seizure of the remaining funds in Mr. Whitman's personal account. At last check, the total left is just under $30,000. The rest appears to have been spent." He glanced down at his notes. He listed the following uses: condo, down payment vehicle purchase, private travel expenses, casino transactions, jewelry, and luxury services. My throat tightened, but I didn't speak. "We've issued a freeze on all assets tied to those purchases," Sergeant Carter said. "The courts will determine what, if any, restitution can be ordered. It's unlikely you'll recover the full amount, but we'll push for as much as possible." My father leaned forward slightly. "We want to press charges," he said. "We're not taking this lightly." The officer met his gaze. "Understood." The next 20 minutes were spent going over timelines, paperwork, and contact information. Aunt Nancy provided digital copies of every document she'd printed, including 2 flagged transactions she hadn't shown us at the house, one linked to a private golf club membership, the other to a storage facility registered in Ryan's name. When we finally stood to leave, Sergeant Carter offered a quiet thank you. "You did the right thing coming in," he said. "This isn't easy, but the law's clear on what happened here." We walked out into the night, the station doors closing behind us with a soft click. The air had cooled, and the scent of creosote from the earlier rain still hung in the breeze. My father didn't speak until we reached the car. "He's going to have to answer for this," he said, unlocking the doors. Back at the house, my mother had turned off most of the lights. Only the lamp in the living room was still on, casting a soft glow across the couch, where she now sat with her arms folded. "Is it done?" she asked as we stepped inside. My father nodded. "It started." She didn't respond right away. Then she said, "Did he say anything to you before they took him?" "No," I said. He didn't look at me. Aunt Nancy stepped into the kitchen to make tea, and my parents sat down side by side on the couch. I stayed by the entryway, unsure what else there was to say. "He'll pay for this," my father said quietly. "Every cent." No one disagreed. A few weeks later, I sat across from my father in his home office, the morning light filtering through the blinds and striping the hardwood floor in soft gold. A pot of coffee sat untouched between us, and the old leather armchair creaked as he shifted his weight forward. On the desk in front of him was a manila folder, thick with papers clipped neatly inside. Ruth Wilson, our family's attorney, joined us a few minutes later, setting her briefcase beside the chair and opening it with a quiet snap. She wore a navy blazer, her glasses perched low on her nose. She greeted us gently, then slid a document across the desk. "Your father's made the necessary changes," she said. "The will has been rewritten, notarized, and filed. It's official." I looked over at him. He met my eyes without hesitation. "The house is yours," he said. "So are the investment accounts. Everything we built, your mother and I, it goes to you now. Ryan's name has been removed entirely." The room went quiet, the weight of it pressed down like a closing door. The house, with its stucco walls and wide backyard, was where we'd celebrated every holiday since I was a child. The investment accounts had been the cornerstone of my father's retirement planning. All of it was now in my name. I didn't speak right away. My fingers traced the edge of the folder. "Are you sure?" I asked, barely above a whisper. My father nodded. "I'm sure. That money he took, it wasn't just cash. It was a future, a piece of your life." And he tried to erase it. My mother sat nearby, hands folded in her lap. She didn't interrupt. Her eyes were tired, and she hadn't said much since that night at the station, but she didn't protest either. Ruth continued, her tone calm and steady. "The $800,000 originally set aside for your studio remains untouched, secured in your personal account. This change affects the family estate, real property holdings, and financial instruments. As of this week, all of it transitions to you." I nodded slowly. It didn't feel like winning something. It felt like closing a chapter with a quiet, final sound. The next morning, I signed the lease on a storefront in downtown Scottsdale. A clean, bright space with whitewashed walls, high ceilings, and tall windows that faced the street. I'd found the listing a month earlier, but hadn't moved on it until now. With the studio fully funded, there was no reason to wait. Mitchell Designs opened 2 months later. The first few weeks were quiet, just a few customers trickling in, some curious locals, a handful of out-of-towners browsing the window displays. I spent my days designing product packaging for small brands, curating artwork from local illustrators, and hanging my own prints in clean frames. By the 3rd month, we were breaking even. A local arts blog featured us in a write-up titled "A Rising Star in Old Town," and things began to pick up from there. Meanwhile, Ryan's life had changed in ways none of us could have predicted. After the formal charges were filed, he lost his job at the real estate group. Clients pulled their listings. His name stopped showing up on contracts. The upscale condo bought with my money was seized by the court and sold off. So was the BMW, the golf club membership, the jewelry. They managed to recover just over $60,000 from everything combined. He moved into a modest apartment complex in Mesa. Aunt Nancy mentioned it once in passing, said the building was next to a strip mall and had a broken gate that never closed properly. He picked up a job selling used cars on commission. Later, I heard he was bartending at a place near the freeway, working 2 shifts to keep up with his court-mandated payments. There was no trial. He pled guilty to felony theft and received 36 months probation, along with a restitution order for the full amount. But with nearly $500,000 already spent, repayment wasn't just unlikely, it was nearly impossible. My parents didn't speak to him again. No calls, no visits, no second chances. I didn't either. Some things don't go back where they were. Aunt Nancy helped me repaint the house. We replaced the framed family portraits with new pieces, local art, soft desert colors, some of my own sketches. My father, now mostly retired, started spending his afternoons in the garage working on small projects, occasionally bringing me coffee at the studio. He didn't talk much about what happened, but he showed up. Mom joined us for Sunday dinners. She still had quiet days where she kept to herself, but she came, and that mattered. We didn't pretend the wound wasn't there. We just stopped letting it bleed. The family was smaller now, but it felt honest. The sign over the door still made me pause when I unlocked the shop each morning. Mitchell Designs, clean white letters set into a soft walnut frame. Inside, the space had started to feel lived-in hand-drawn prints, lining the far wall shelves of curated stationery, sun-faded rugs, rolled out under a central table of new arrivals. I worked long hours, but they didn't feel heavy. The studio gave me structure when things around me still felt loose. Some days I stayed past closing, rearranging displays or sketching out new product lines. Other days I just sat behind the counter watching the light change through the tall front windows. People came. At first just a few, then more. Locals wandered in after brunch on Saturdays. A woman visiting from Santa Fe bought 3 framed prints for her reading room. A blogger with a small following posted a glowing review, and traffic picked up the following week. I didn't advertise much, but word spread. One afternoon, a man from a regional magazine came by with a notepad and camera. He stayed for an hour, asked about my process, and took photos of the gallery wall I'd built near the back. The article came out 2 weeks later. A quiet corner of creativity in Old Town Scottsdale. After that, business tripled. It was steady, not explosive, but it was mine. I poured everything into it, my savings, my time, my name. The $800,000 my parents had gifted for the studio hadn't just saved the dream, it built it. It kept the lights on and let me take risks. By the 6th month, I was turning a profit. Meanwhile, I heard about Ryan in fragments. A friend mentioned his name while waiting in line at the bakery down the street. Said he'd seen him behind the counter at a car dealership flipping keys and answering phones. Another time, someone stopped by the studio and asked if I was related to that Whitman guy who used to sell condos near Kierland. I nodded, then changed the subject. He'd been sentenced to probation and ordered to make monthly payments. The restitution plan was based on income he'd never come close to what he owed. I heard he'd taken a second job, then lost it. That his apartment building changed owners and raised the rent. That he moved in with a roommate to stay afloat. The court recovered what they could. The last update from Ruth confirmed just over $60,000 had been returned to the estate through liquidated assets, his car, the club membership, the condo furniture. That left a debt of $440,000. There were no calls, no letters, nothing through Ruth's office. The silence felt final. Back at the house, things were quieter too. My father came by the studio most mornings bringing coffee and small repairs light bulbs, brackets, a new power strip for the counter. He didn't talk about Ryan. He didn't need to. Mom joined us some Sundays for brunch, though she still moved carefully in conversation. There were pauses in her stories, skips in her memory, whenever Ryan's name might have appeared. She never said it, just left space where it used to be. Aunt Nancy remained a steady presence. She helped paint the back hallway, ran errands when I couldn't get away, and once brought over 3 boxes of local art books from a library auction. We'd sit at the kitchen table in the studio, after closing sorting through them, marking the ones worth keeping. She didn't talk about that night anymore, but she kept the folder in her purse. I settled into the house in my own way, repainted the dining room a pale green, donated the heavy drapes in the living room, brought in new rugs, opened the windows more. The photos that had once hung on the stairwell, birthday parties, beach vacations, graduations were gone now. In their place, I hung simple frames of desert wildflowers, black and white prints from local photographers, and a pencil sketch of my storefront. It felt like something had ended, but it also felt like something had begun. One night I stood in the kitchen with the door open to the patio. The scent of rosemary drifted in from the garden beds my mother had once tended. The wind was soft and warm, the hum of traffic low in the distance. Somewhere inside the dishwasher clicked off. I thought about the $500,000, what it could have been. But more than that, I thought about what it hadn't taken. The studio, the house, my name. Those things were still mine. There are still nights when I lock up the studio and stand outside for a few minutes before heading home. The desert air cools just enough to let you breathe easy, and the light fades slow across the rooftops. From where I park, I can see the soft glow of the sign in the front window, Mitchell Designs, like a quiet promise I kept to myself. Sometimes I catch myself wondering if Ryan ever drives by, maybe on his way home from work or when traffic's bad on the 101. I don't know if he'd recognize the space now, how it's grown into something steady. I doubt he'd stop. I think he knows that door isn't open anymore. The last update I got through Ruth confirmed he was still on probation, still working to make monthly restitution payments. The balance hadn't changed much. Most of it would never come back. But what I lost in dollars I found in something else, something slower, harder earned. Boundaries. They didn't come easy. Not in a family like mine. We were raised to be polite, to smooth things over, to keep the peace. And for a long time I did. I swallowed things. I let people finish my sentences for me. I let Ryan carry the room even when it cost me space. But when everything fell apart, there was no smoothing over left to do. There was only what was true and the choice to stand in it. My father made that choice too. He stood with me at the bank, at the lawyer's office, at the police station. Not because it was easy, but because he believed it mattered. Aunt Nancy showed up every day after filling the quiet with coffee and repair kits and art books she thought I'd like. Even my mother, quiet and grieving in her own way, never asked me to forgive what I couldn't. We didn't rebuild the old shape of our family. We built something smaller, something honest, and in that quiet space, I got to work. I opened the doors to my studio. I paid the rent early. I framed my own art. I turned a stolen future into a lived one. Every piece that hung on those walls was a step forward. Ryan taught me a lot of things. Some I wish I hadn't learned the hard way. But the one that's stuck is this: trust isn't a blanket you hand out. It's something you build, protect, and sometimes walk away from even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. The night the first frost hit, I pulled the last of my mother's herbs from the garden and brought them inside. The house was quiet. My father had gone to bed early, and Aunt Nancy was staying the weekend. I made tea, sat by the window, and let the warmth settle in. There was peace in that stillness. Not because everything was fixed, but because I finally knew what I was willing to hold on to and what I had to let go. If you've ever had to rebuild from a betrayal, or learned that boundaries can be an act of love too, I hope this story finds you. And if it does, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Just drop a comment below and maybe share this with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end.